Elira's hands shook as she counted the coins in her palm for the third time. 4 copper pieces. That was all she had left in the world, and the baker down the lane wanted 6 just for a small sack of grain. She pressed her back against the cold stone wall of her cottage and closed her eyes, trying to remember the last time her stomach did not ache with hunger. A scream cut through the quiet morning air. Elira's eyes snapped open. Somewhere near the village well, a woman was shouting for help. Elira dropped the coins into her pocket and ran toward the sound, her bare feet slapping against the frozen dirt path. She rounded the corner and saw a crowd gathering, but no one was moving to help. They stood in a circle, watching, whispering, doing nothing. In the center of the circle lay a man. He was thin, filthy, and shivering violently on the ground. His clothes were torn rags, his face streaked with dirt and ash, and his lips had turned a pale shade of blue. He looked like he had been walking for days without food or rest. "Someone call the healer," Elira said, pushing through the crowd. A beta woman scoffed beside her. "For a beggar, save your breath, girl. He is probably diseased. Best to let the guards drag him out past the border before he brings sickness to the rest of us." "He is a person," Elira snapped, kneeling beside the stranger. "Not trash to be dragged away." The crowd murmured, but did not move to stop her. Elira pressed 2 fingers against the man's neck and felt a weak, fluttering pulse. He was alive, but barely. His body trembled from cold and hunger, the same hunger she knew far too well. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked softly. His eyes opened slightly. They were a striking shade of gray, sharp and alert despite his weakened state, as if some part of him refused to fully surrender to exhaustion. He looked at her for a long moment, before his eyelids fluttered shut again. Elira looked around at the crowd. No one stepped forward. No one offered a blanket, water, or a hand. She recognized several faces from wealthier families in the pack, alphas and betas who wore fine cloaks and gold rings, yet not one of them reached out to help a dying man at their feet. "Fine," she muttered under her breath. "I will do it myself." She was small, but stubborn strength had carried her through worse days than this one. She hooked her arms under the stranger's shoulders and, with great effort, pulled him upright. He was heavier than he looked, but she managed to drape one of his arms over her shoulders and half walk, half drag him away from the crowd. Behind her, she heard someone laugh. The Poorest Omega picking up strays now. Fitting, I suppose. Beggars help beggars. Elira did not turn around. She had heard worse insults thrown at her before, and she had learned long ago that responding only fed the cruelty. She focused instead on getting the stranger to her cottage, one slow step at a time, ignoring the burning ache in her thin arms. By the time she reached her door, her legs trembled from the strain. She kicked the door open and guided the man inside, lowering him carefully onto the thin blanket that served as her bed. It was the only real piece of furniture in the tiny cottage, aside from a wooden stool and a small table with a cracked bowl on top. She knelt beside him and studied his face, in the dim light filtering through the cracked window. Despite the dirt and the days of clear suffering etched into his features, there was something about him that did not fit the picture of an ordinary beggar. His posture, even unconscious, carried a strange kind of dignity. His hands, though rough with dirt, did not have the deep calluses of a laborer. She pushed the thought aside. It did not matter who he was or where he came from. Right now, he was simply a person who needed help, and she intended to give it. Elira filled a cup with water from the small clay jug by her window and gently lifted his head, tipping small sips past his cracked lips. He coughed weakly but swallowed, and slowly his breathing began to steady. Then her stomach growled loudly, reminding her that she had not eaten since the previous morning. She glanced at the small shelf where a single heel of stale bread sat wrapped in a thin cloth. It was all the food she had left, meant to last her through tomorrow and the day after, when she hoped to earn a few more coins mending clothes for the tailor. She looked at the stranger's hollow cheeks and the way his ribs pressed visibly against his torn shirt. There was no question in her mind. She unwrapped the bread and broke it in half. One piece she set aside for herself, smaller than the other. The larger piece she brought to the man's lips, gently coaxing him awake enough to eat. His eyes opened again, clearer this time, and he stared at the bread in her hand, as if he did not understand what he was seeing. "Eat," she said softly. You need it more than I do. I cannot take your food, he rasped, his voice hoarse and rough from disuse. You have so little yourself. I have enough for now, she said, pressing the bread gently into his hand. You have nothing. Please, eat. He hesitated, staring at her with those sharp gray eyes, searching her face as though trying to understand why a stranger would give away the last of her food to someone she had never met. Slowly, almost disbelieving, he brought the bread to his mouth and ate. Elira watched him eat in silence, feeling a small measure of relief settle into her chest. Whatever had brought this man to her doorstep, whatever pain or misfortune had reduced him to this state, at least for this moment, he was not alone, and he was not starving. When he finished the bread, he looked at her with an expression she could not quite place. Gratitude, certainly, but something else lingered beneath it. Something like disbelief, or perhaps shame. Why did you help me? He asked. The others simply watched. Elira shrugged, wrapping her arms around her knees as she sat beside him. Because someone has to. I know what it feels like to be forgotten. I would not wish that feeling on anyone, not even a stranger. You do not even know my name, he said. Does that matter? She asked. You were hurting. That was enough for me to know. He studied her for a long moment, and something in his gaze softened. My name is Rurik, he said finally. I am an exile. I have been wandering for some time, with nowhere to call home. I am Elira, she replied. This is not much, but it is somewhere you can rest, at least for tonight. Elira, he repeated quietly, as though testing the shape of her name. Thank you. I will not forget this kindness. She smiled faintly, though exhaustion tugged at the corners of her eyes. Rest now. We can talk more when you have your strength back. He nodded, his eyelids growing heavy again as sleep finally claimed him. Elira watched him for a moment longer, noting the way his brow remained slightly furrowed even in sleep, as though some deep worry followed him even into his dreams. She settled onto the wooden stool nearby, wrapping her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders against the evening chill. Outside, the sounds of the village continued, distant laughter, the clatter of carts, the occasional bark of a dog. None of it reached this quiet, forgotten corner where she lived. As she watched the stranger sleep, she could not shake the strange feeling that had settled over her since she first knelt beside him at the well. There was something about him, something beneath the dirt and the rags, that did not belong to the world of beggars and outcasts she knew so well. But she pushed the thought away. Whoever he was, whatever secrets he carried, he was simply a man who needed kindness tonight. And kindness, she believed, should never require conditions or explanations. She had given her last piece of bread without knowing it would change everything. Little did she know, the man sleeping in her cottage was Alaric Voss, the alpha king of the entire Ashwood territory, the very ruler whose pack had let her starve at its edges for years. He had left his palace in disguise 3 days earlier, determined to see with his own eyes whether the rumors reaching his ears were true, that his people were suffering, while those closest to him hid the truth behind polished words and empty promises. He had walked for miles without food, testing how far kindness could be found among strangers, and he had found nothing but closed doors and turned backs, until he collapsed near a well, in the poorest corner of his own kingdom. And there, in the last place he expected, a woman with nothing had given him everything she had. As the candle burned low and shadows stretched across the small cottage, Elira finally allowed her own eyes to close, unaware that the sleeping stranger beside her carried the fate of her entire pack in his hands. Tomorrow would bring questions neither of them could yet imagine. But for tonight, there was only the quiet comfort of two strangers finding unexpected warmth in a cold, uncaring world. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose shutters of the cottage, but inside, for the first time in days, both the king and the Omega slept a little easier, each unaware of how deeply their lives had just become entangled. Elira woke before dawn, to the sound of quiet breathing beside her. For a moment she forgot where she was, then the events of the previous evening came rushing back. The stranger, Rurik, still lay on her thin blanket, his chest rising and falling steadily now, instead of the shallow, ragged breaths from before. She rose quietly and stepped outside to fetch water from the well, before the village grew crowded. The morning air was sharp and cold, biting at her cheeks as she walked the familiar path. She passed the same beta woman from the day before, who eyed her with obvious disdain but said nothing this time. When Elira returned, Rurik was sitting up, leaning against the wall with a hand pressed to his ribs, where dark bruises had begun to bloom across his pale skin. He looked stronger than the night before, though his face was still gaunt with hunger. "You should not have gone out alone," he said, his voice steadier now. "This village does not seem kind to those who help strangers." "I have lived here my whole life," Elira replied, setting the water jug down. "I know how to take care of myself." "Even so," he said, studying her carefully, "you took a risk helping me. Most would not have." Elira busied herself preparing what little she had. A handful of dried herbs she boiled into a thin broth. It was not much, but it would help restore some strength to his weakened body. As she worked, she felt his eyes following her movements, curious and thoughtful. "Tell me about this place," he said after a while. "What is it like, living on the edge of the pack?" Elira paused, surprised by the question. Most people never asked. They simply assumed, or worse, they did not care enough to wonder. "It is hard," she admitted. "The pack looks after its favored families first, those with strong bloodlines, wealth, and connections. The rest of us are left to manage on our own." "And you? Why do they treat you as they do?" She hesitated, unsure how much to share with a stranger she had known for less than a day, but something about his steady gaze made her feel oddly at ease, as though he genuinely wanted to understand rather than simply judge. "My parents died when I was young," she said quietly. "Fever swept through the lower village one winter and took them both within days of each other. I had no other family to take me in. The pack elders decided I was not worth the effort of proper care, since I showed no strong bond potential and came from what they called weak bloodlines. So I was left here, in this cottage, to fend for myself." Rurik's jaw tightened, though he said nothing for a long moment. "That seems a cruel judgment to place on a child who lost everything." "It is simply how things are," Elira said, though there was a flicker of old pain behind her calm words. "I learned quickly that surviving here means expecting nothing from anyone. Kindness is rare, so I try to offer it when I can, even if I have little to give." "You gave me your last bread," Rurik said softly. "That was not little, that was everything you had." Elira offered a small, tired smile. "You needed it more." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, as the broth finished cooking. Elira poured it into the single cracked bowl she owned, and handed it to him first, waving away his protest that she should eat as well. "I ate this morning," she lied gently, though her stomach ached with hunger. She had not eaten since sharing the bread the night before, but she had grown skilled at hiding hunger behind a calm expression. As Rurik drank the broth, his sharp eyes studied the small cottage around them. The roof had visible gaps where sunlight streamed through in thin beams. The walls were bare except for a single dried flower pressed against the stone, likely a small comfort Elira had kept for herself. There was no food stored anywhere, no coins visible, nothing beyond the bare essentials needed for survival. He thought of his own palace, its warm halls filled with more food than could ever be eaten, fires burning in every room even during the mildest evenings, and guards posted at every entrance to protect wealth that sat mostly untouched in storerooms. The contrast struck him deeply, a quiet anger building steadily in his chest, not at Elira, but at the systems and people who had allowed such inequality to exist within his own territory, without his knowledge. "Does the pack provide nothing for those in need?" he asked carefully, testing how much she knew, how deeply the corruption ran. Elira laughed softly, though there was little humor in the sound. "There are rumors of grain stores, meant for the poor, kept by the pack elders. But by the time anything reaches this part of the village, if it reaches at all, there is barely enough to matter. Most of it disappears into the pockets of merchants who claim it for themselves and sell it back to us, at prices we cannot afford." "And the Alpha King? Does he know of this?" Elira shrugged. "Perhaps, perhaps not. Kings rarely walk among the poorest of their pack. He sits in his palace, surrounded by advisors who tell him only what he wishes to hear. How would he ever know the truth of what happens beyond his golden gates?" Rurik said nothing, but his hands tightened slightly around the bowl. Her words struck deeper than she could have known, confirming every fear that had driven him from his palace in the first place. "You speak as though you have given up hope in him," Rurik said quietly. "I have given up hope in many things," Elira admitted, "but I still believe kindness matters, even in small ways. Even if the king never learns the truth, even if nothing ever changes, I would rather help someone in need than turn away like the others." Her words settled over him like a quiet weight, and in that moment, Alaric made a silent vow to himself. Whatever it took, he would not let her kindness go unanswered. He would learn everything, see everything, and when the time came, he would ensure that no one in his kingdom ever had to survive on so little again. Over the following 2 days, Rurik remained in Alira's cottage, slowly regaining his strength. She continued to share what little food she managed to gather, refusing his offers to leave and find his own way despite his growing health. In turn, he helped her with small tasks around the cottage, patching the roof where he could, gathering firewood, and repairing a loose hinge on her door. Their conversations grew longer each evening, stretching late into the night. As they sat together near the small fire Alira allowed herself only on the coldest nights. She told him stories of her childhood, brief happy memories from before her parents passed, and the quiet dreams she still carried despite her circumstances, a hope to one day open a small shop of her own, selling herbs and remedies she had taught herself to prepare. Rurik shared carefully edited versions of his own past, speaking of distant travels and lessons learned along difficult roads, always careful to avoid revealing the truth of his identity. He found himself drawn not only to her resilience, but to the quiet strength of her spirit, unbroken, despite years of neglect and cruelty, from those who should have cared for her. But even as their bond grew, Rurik remained watchful, observing the world around Alira's cottage with a careful, calculating eye. He noted the way villagers avoided her home, the way merchants overpriced even the most basic goods when she attempted to trade, and the quiet fear that crossed her face whenever certain figures passed by, particularly a broad-shouldered warrior who seemed to take pleasure in mocking her whenever their paths crossed. He filed every detail away, every injustice, every cruel word, building a clear picture of the corruption that had taken root within his own pack, while he remained blind to it within his palace walls. On the third evening, as Alira prepared their meager meal, a loud commotion erupted outside. Raised voices carried through the thin walls of the cottage, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone being shoved roughly against a wooden cart. Alira's face paled. "That is Cade," she whispered, "one of the pack warriors. He often comes through this part of the village to collect what he calls fair tribute from those who cannot pay their proper dues." Rurik's expression darkened, a familiar fire rising within him that he had not felt in years, not since his early training days as a young alpha, learning to protect those weaker than himself. "Stay inside," he said quietly, moving toward the door. "Rurik, wait," Alira said, grabbing his arm. "You are still recovering. Please, do not involve yourself in this." He turned to her, his gray eyes steady and calm, despite the tension building within him. "Some things," he said quietly, "cannot be ignored, no matter the cost." And with that, he stepped outside into the gathering dusk, unaware that the coming confrontation would reveal far more than he intended, setting into motion events that would change both his life and Alira's forever. Cade stood in the narrow lane outside, his broad frame casting a long shadow over an elderly beta man who cowered against the wheel of his own cart. 2 smaller sacks of grain lay spilled across the dirt, trampled beneath Cade's boots as he sneered down at the old man. "You knew the tribute was due 3 days ago," Cade snapped, grabbing the front of the man's tunic. "Do you think the pack survives on excuses?" "Please," the old man stammered. "My harvest was small this season. I have nothing more to give." "Then perhaps I should take what little you do have," Cade said, kicking one of the fallen sacks. "Consider it a lesson for next time." Rurik stepped into the lane, his voice carrying a quiet authority that seemed strange coming from a man dressed in rags. "Let him go." Cade turned, momentarily surprised by the interruption, before his expression twisted into amusement. "And who exactly are you? Another beggar looking for a beating?" "Someone who does not enjoy watching a grown man bully an elder over a handful of grain," Rurik replied evenly, positioning himself between Cade and the old man. The small crowd that had gathered to watch murmured among themselves, clearly unaccustomed to anyone standing against Cade's authority. Alira watched from the doorway of her cottage, her heart pounding with fear for the man who had shown her nothing but kindness these past few days. Cade laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "You have no idea who you are dealing with, stranger. I collect tribute in the name of the pack elders. Interfering with my duties is interfering with the pack itself. Duties, Rurik repeated, his tone edged with quiet contempt. Is that what you call taking food from a man who clearly has nothing left to give? Cade's jaw tightened, his amusement fading into something colder. You dare question pack authority? I could have you dragged from this village for such insolence. Then drag me, Rurik said calmly, not moving from his position. But you will not touch this man again while I stand here. The tension in the lane grew thick enough to feel. Cade's eyes narrowed, sizing up the thin, ragged stranger before him, clearly unimpressed by his frail appearance, despite the strange confidence in his voice. Foolish choice, Cade muttered, and without further warning, he lunged forward. What followed happened quickly, though every moment felt stretched and heavy to those watching. Cade threw the first strike, aiming to intimidate rather than seriously injure, expecting the malnourished stranger to crumble easily beneath the blow. Instead, Rurik moved with surprising precision, stepping aside just enough to avoid the worst of the impact, while redirecting Cade's momentum. Years of training as a warrior himself, long before he ever wore a crown, had not left him despite his weakened physical state. But his body, still recovering from days without proper food, could not sustain the same strength it once carried effortlessly. Cade recovered quickly, landing a solid blow across Rurik's ribs, the same ribs still tender from days of hunger and exhaustion. Rurik staggered but did not fall, gritting his teeth against the sharp pain as he steadied himself. Stop! Elira's voice cut through the tension as she rushed forward, unable to watch any longer. Please, Cade, leave him be. He meant no true harm. Cade turned toward her, his expression shifting into something colder and more calculating. Ah, the poorest Omega, defending her stray beggar. How touching. Leave him alone, Elira repeated, positioning herself protectively between the two men despite the obvious danger to herself. Cade's eyes raked over her with open disdain. Perhaps I should simply take what I am rightfully owed from you instead, since you seem so eager to interfere with pack business. The threat hung heavy in the air, and Rurik's expression darkened dangerously. Every instinct within him, honed through years of leadership and protection over his people, roared to life. He straightened despite his injuries, stepping forward once more. You will not touch her, he said, his voice dropping into something low and commanding, carrying an authority that seemed to momentarily unsettle even Cade. For a brief moment, something flickered across Cade's face, confusion perhaps, or a strange recognition he could not quite place. But he shook it off quickly, refusing to back down in front of the gathered crowd. Enough talk, Cade growled, lunging forward again. This time, the exchange was brief but brutal. Rurik managed to block the worst of the strikes aimed at him, but his weakened body could not fully protect him from the assault. A sharp blow caught him across the jaw, sending him stumbling backward into the dirt. Rurik! Elira cried, rushing to his side despite the danger, kneeling beside him as blood trickled from a small cut near his lip. Cade stood over them both, breathing heavily, a satisfied smirk crossing his face at having proven his dominance in front of the watching crowd. Let this be a lesson, he said loudly, addressing the onlookers as much as Elira and Rurik. Interference with pack business carries consequences. Perhaps next time, you will think twice before defending strangers who have no place here. He turned and walked away, leaving the scattered grain and the old man still trembling by his cart. The crowd slowly dispersed, whispering amongst themselves, none offering to help as Elira struggled to support Rurik's weight, guiding him carefully back toward her cottage. Once inside, she helped him settle onto the blanket, her hands trembling as she assessed the damage. A darkening bruise had already formed along his jaw, and he winced sharply when she gently pressed against his ribs. You should not have done that, she said softly, though there was no real anger in her voice, only worry. You could have been seriously hurt. I could not simply stand by, Rurik replied, his voice strained with pain, but steady in conviction. What he was doing was wrong. Many things here are wrong, Elira said quietly, dampening a cloth with water to clean the cut near his lip. But fighting against it alone rarely changes anything. It simply invites more suffering. Rurik watched her carefully as she tended his wounds with practiced, gentle hands, clearly no stranger to caring for injuries, despite having no formal training. You speak as though you have accepted that nothing will ever change, he said. I have learned not to hope for things I cannot control, she admitted. It hurts less that way. Her words settled deeply within him, a quiet ache forming in his chest that had nothing to do with his physical injuries. He thought of his palace, his advisors, the reports he had trusted without question, and the vast gap that existed between the comfortable world he knew and the harsh reality Elira lived every single day. You should not have to live this way, he said quietly. No one should. Elira paused, looking at him with an expression caught somewhere between surprise and quiet sadness. That is a kind thought, she said. But kindness alone does not fill empty stomachs, or protect against warriors who answer to no one. Perhaps not, Rurik said, his gray eyes steady and thoughtful. But sometimes, kindness is the first step toward something greater. She did not respond, though something in her expression softened slightly, as though his words had touched a part of her she had long since guarded against hope. She finished cleaning his wounds in comfortable silence, the quiet warmth between them growing steadily, despite the pain and danger of the day. As night fell over the village, Elira extinguished the small candle, plunging the cottage into gentle darkness. She settled onto her stool once more, watching over Rurik as exhaustion finally pulled him into a restless sleep. She did not yet know that the man she had risked so much to protect carried the power to change everything she had ever known. Nor did she know that word of the confrontation had already begun spreading beyond the village, carried by whispers and rumors toward ears far more powerful than she could have imagined, ears that belonged to the very palace guards, searching desperately for their missing king. The quiet peace of the cottage would not last much longer. Somewhere beyond the village borders, riders were already gathering, following the faint trail of rumors about a mysterious beggar who had dared stand against a pack warrior, with the strength and bearing of someone far greater than his ragged appearance suggested. Change was coming, swift and unstoppable, and neither Elira nor Alaric could yet predict how deeply it would alter the course of both their lives. Morning arrived quietly, though the calm did not last. Elira woke to the sound of horses approaching, many horses, their hooves striking the frozen ground in a steady, purposeful rhythm that echoed through the narrow lanes of the village. She rose quickly, peering through the cracked window, to see a group of armored riders moving through the streets, their polished breastplates catching the pale morning light. Rurik, she whispered urgently, shaking him gently awake. Something is happening outside. He stirred, immediately alert despite his injuries, years of training allowing him to shift from sleep to full awareness within moments. He moved to the window beside her, and the color drained slightly from his face as he recognized the crest emblazoned across the rider's armor, the mark of his own royal guard. They have found me, he murmured, more to himself than to her. Found you? Elira asked, confusion clouding her expression. Rurik, what do you mean? Before he could answer, a firm knock struck the cottage door, followed by a commanding voice. Open in the name of the pack guard. We seek a missing traveler last seen in this area. Elira's heart pounded as she glanced between the door and Rurik, whose expression had shifted into something guarded and unreadable. Should I answer? She whispered. He hesitated only a moment before nodding slowly. It is time, he said quietly, though his voice carried a strange heaviness she did not yet understand. Elira opened the door cautiously, and immediately, several armored guards stepped forward, their sharp eyes scanning the small cottage, before landing on Rurik, standing near the window. Their expressions shifted instantly, from stern authority to visible shock and relief. Alpha King, the lead guard breathed, dropping immediately to one knee, the others following suit without hesitation. We have searched every corner of the territory for you. The palace has been in an uproar since your disappearance. Elira froze, her mind struggling to process the words she had just heard. Alpha King. She turned slowly to look at Rurik, only he no longer looked like the ragged, humble stranger she had cared for over the past several days. Something in his posture had shifted, an unmistakable authority settling over him that she had somehow sensed but never fully allowed herself to recognize. Rise, Rurik said, his voice carrying the same commanding tone she had briefly heard during the confrontation with Cade, only now she understood exactly why it had sounded so natural coming from him. I am unharmed, mostly. Return to the palace and inform my council that I will follow shortly. Yes, my king, the lead guard replied, though his eyes flickered briefly toward Illyra, with poorly concealed curiosity, before the guards rose and exited the cottage, leaving an unbearable silence in their wake. Illyra stood frozen, staring at the man she had known as Rurik, a wandering exile with nothing to his name, now revealed as Alaric Voss, the very Alpha King whose neglect and blindness had allowed her suffering, and the suffering of countless others, to continue unnoticed for years. "You lied to me," she said finally, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and rising anger. "You let me believe you were simply a beggar, a stranger with nothing, while all along you were the king of this entire territory." "Illyra, please, let me explain," Alaric said, stepping toward her, but she took a sharp step back, putting distance between them. "Explain what?" she asked, her voice rising, despite her usual composure. "That you disguised yourself and lived among us, watched us suffer, watched me give you my last piece of bread, all while hiding who you truly were? Did you find it amusing, watching the poorest Omega care for her own king without knowing it?" "No," Alaric said firmly, his gray eyes filled with genuine distress at her accusation. "I disguised myself because I needed to see the truth of my own territory with my own eyes. I could not trust the reports given to me by advisors who clearly hid the reality of what was happening to my people." "And what did you learn?" Illyra demanded, tears of frustration and hurt gathering at the corners of her eyes. "That the poorest Omega in your kingdom was foolish enough to trust a stranger, to share what little she had, all while you silently judged and observed like some kind of test." "It was never a test of you," Alaric said, his voice softening. "It became something far greater than I ever expected. You showed me more genuine kindness in a few days than my entire court has shown in years. You gave me everything you had without expecting anything in return. Because that is who I am," Illyra snapped, wiping at her eyes angrily. "Not because I sought some reward or recognition. I helped you because it was the right thing to do, not because I hoped for a crown or riches in return." "I know that," Alaric said quietly, "and that is precisely why what you did means more to me than you could possibly understand." Illyra turned away from him, wrapping her arms tightly around herself as conflicting emotions warred within her chest. Betrayal, confusion, and beneath it all, a lingering warmth for the man she had come to know over the past several days. A warmth she now feared had been built on a foundation of deception. "You should leave," she said quietly, her back still turned to him. "Return to your palace, to your council, and your guards. This cottage, this life, it is not yours to disrupt any further." Alaric remained silent for a long moment, the weight of her words settling heavily upon him. He understood her anger, understood the depth of the betrayal she felt, even if his intentions had never been to cause her harm. "I will leave, for now," he said finally. "But know this, Illyra. Everything I witnessed here, every injustice, every act of cruelty inflicted upon you and others like you, it will not go unanswered. I promise you that." She said nothing, and after a moment, she heard the soft sound of the door opening and closing as he departed, leaving her alone once more, within the small cottage that had briefly felt less lonely than it had in years. Illyra sank onto the wooden stool, burying her face in her hands, as the reality of the past few days crashed over her fully. She had cared for the Alpha King of Ashwood, without ever knowing his true identity, had shared her food, her stories, her carefully guarded trust, all while he silently observed and studied the very suffering his own kingdom had inflicted upon her. Part of her wanted to believe his intentions had been genuine, that his time in her cottage had meant something real, beyond simple observation. But a larger part of her felt foolish, exposed, as though her kindness had been reduced to nothing more than evidence in whatever plan he had been formulating from the very beginning. Outside, word of the Alpha King's discovery spread rapidly through the village, whispers turning to shocked murmurs, as villagers began to piece together the strange events of the past several days. The beggar who had stood against Cade, who had lived quietly within the poorest Omega's cottage, had been their king all along. Cade himself received the news with visible horror, the color draining from his face as he realized the man he had struck down in the street, the man he had mocked and beaten without mercy, was none other than his own Alpha King in disguise. Fear settled heavily in his chest, knowing that such an offense could not go unpunished. Meanwhile, within Illyra's small cottage, she remained curled upon her stool, long after the guards had departed, the ache of betrayal mixing painfully with a quiet, persistent longing she refused to fully acknowledge. Whatever Alaric Voss truly intended, whatever plans now formed within his mind following his return to the palace, one truth remained undeniable. Nothing between them would ever be the same again. And as the sun rose higher over the village, casting long shadows across the poorest corners of Ashwood territory, both the king and the Omega found themselves changed irrevocably by the events of the past several days, their fates now intertwined in ways neither could yet fully comprehend. The palace felt different to Alaric as he walked through its familiar halls, though nothing about the structure itself had changed. The same golden chandeliers hung overhead, the same polished floors stretched beneath his feet, yet everything now seemed to carry an unfamiliar weight, a stark contrast to the crumbling cottage and empty stomachs he had witnessed just beyond the palace gates. His council awaited him in the grand hall, their faces a mixture of relief and barely concealed anxiety. Edmund, his eldest advisor, stepped forward first, his expression carefully composed, despite the obvious tension in his shoulders. "My king, we feared the worst when you vanished without word," Edmund said, bowing slightly. "The entire council has been in an uproar these past several days." "I am certain you have," Alaric replied evenly, his gray eyes sweeping across the assembled council members, each of them dressed in fine silks and adorned with jewelry that could have fed an entire village for months. "Tell me, Edmund, when was the last time you visited the lower village, the poorest corners of our territory?" Edmund shifted uncomfortably. "My king, surely such matters are beneath the direct attention of the council. We have overseers appointed specifically to manage those regions." "And what of those overseers reported to you?" Alaric pressed, his voice carrying a dangerous calm that made several council members exchange nervous glances. "That all is well managed, my king," another advisor spoke up quickly. "Grain distributions occur regularly, and the pack ensures no one goes without basic necessities." Alaric's expression hardened. "I spent the past several days living among those very people you claim are well cared for. I witnessed children too weak from hunger to stand properly. I watched an elderly man beaten in the street for failing to pay tribute he simply did not have. I myself was struck down by one of our own warriors while attempting to protect that same elder." Silence fell heavily over the grand hall, the council members exchanging uneasy glances as the weight of his words settled over them. "My king," Edmund began carefully, "surely there has been some misunderstanding." "There has been no misunderstanding," Alaric interrupted sharply. "I saw the truth with my own eyes. Truth that has clearly been hidden from me for far too long, by those meant to serve and advise me faithfully. Explain to me, Edmund, how grain meant for the poorest villages disappears before ever reaching those in need." Edmund's face paled visibly, and he struggled to find words to defend himself against the direct accusation. "I want a full account," Alaric continued, his voice carrying throughout the hall with unmistakable authority. "Every merchant, every overseer, every council member involved in the distribution of resources meant for our people. I want to know exactly where the corruption runs deepest, and I want it addressed immediately." "Yes, my king," Edmund murmured, bowing low, sweat visible upon his brow despite the coolness of the hall. Alaric turned to address the wider council, his gaze sweeping over each member with quiet, controlled fury. "For years, I trusted this council to manage the well-being of our pack faithfully. I trusted reports that painted a picture of prosperity and fair treatment for all, regardless of status or bloodline. I was wrong to place such blind trust without verifying the truth myself." He paused, allowing his words to settle heavily over the room before continuing. "That mistake ends today. From this moment forward, I will personally oversee reforms to ensure every member of this pack, regardless of rank, wealth, or bloodline, receives fair treatment and access to basic necessities. Any advisor or council member found complicit in the corruption I witnessed will face immediate consequences." Murmurs rippled through the assembled council, some nodding in solemn agreement, others exchanging worried glances, clearly concerned about what such reforms might mean for the wealth and privilege they had long enjoyed, at the expense of the pack's poorest members. "Additionally," Alaric continued, "I want the warrior Cade brought before me immediately. I witnessed firsthand his treatment of an elderly beta man and his threats against an innocent Omega. Such behavior from someone meant to protect and serve our pack will not go unpunished. Within the hour, Cade stood before the council, his usual confidence replaced by visible fear as he awaited judgment from the very man he had struck down without knowing his true identity. "My king," Cade began, his voice trembling slightly. "I did not know. I would never have." "Would never have what?" Alaric interrupted coldly. "Struck an unarmed stranger simply for standing against your cruelty? Threatened an innocent Omega for daring to defend herself and others from your abuse of power? Your ignorance of my identity does not excuse your actions, Cade. It merely reveals exactly how you treat those you believe hold no power to challenge you." Cade lowered his head, unable to meet the king's sharp gaze. "What is to become of me, my king?" "You are stripped of your rank effective immediately," Alaric said firmly. "You will spend the coming months working directly within the lower villages, providing labor and assistance to those you once exploited, under close supervision. Perhaps through honest work and genuine service, you will come to understand the harm your actions have caused." Cade nodded slowly, clearly relieved the punishment was not more severe, though the humiliation of his fall from status was evident in his posture as he was escorted from the hall. As the council dispersed to begin the difficult work of investigating the corruption Alaric had uncovered, he remained alone in the grand hall, his thoughts drifting inevitably back to the small cottage at the edge of the village, to the woman whose kindness had opened his eyes to truths he might never have otherwise discovered. He thought of Alira's angry, hurt expression as she learned his true identity, the way she had turned away from him, unable to reconcile the humble stranger she had cared for, with the powerful king who now stood before her. Guilt settled heavily in his chest, though he understood the necessity of his deception had been unavoidable, if he truly wished to see the unfiltered truth of his kingdom. Still, he could not shake the feeling that he owed her more than a simple explanation. She deserved to see the changes his reforms would bring, to understand that her kindness had not been wasted on empty observation, but had instead sparked a genuine transformation within both himself and the kingdom he ruled. Over the following days, Alaric threw himself fully into the work of reform, meeting with village leaders, redistributing hoarded resources, and establishing new systems of accountability to ensure such corruption could never again take root unnoticed within his territory. Grain stores were opened and properly distributed, corrupt merchants were removed from their positions, and new protections were established, specifically for Omegas and lower-ranked members of the pack who had long been vulnerable to exploitation. Word of the reforms spread quickly throughout Ashwood territory, met with cautious hope from those who had suffered under the previous neglect, though many remained skeptical, having witnessed empty promises before, from a pack that rarely followed through on meaningful change. Alira herself heard the rumors of reform circulating through the village, though she remained guarded, unwilling to fully trust that anything would truly change, simply because the king had briefly walked among the poor before returning to his palace of comfort and privilege. She continued her quiet, solitary life, tending her small garden and mending clothes for what little income she could earn, though the ache of betrayal and the strange, persistent longing for the man she had known as Rurik continued to linger beneath her carefully maintained composure. She did not yet know that Alaric had not forgotten her, nor the debt he felt he owed for the kindness she had shown him during his darkest, most vulnerable moment. Nor did she know that the reforms sweeping through the kingdom would soon bring him back to her doorstep, not as a disguised stranger seeking shelter, but as a king seeking forgiveness and something far more meaningful than simple gratitude. The path ahead remained uncertain, filled with lingering hurt and unresolved questions, but change had already taken root, both within the kingdom of Ashwood and within the hearts of two people whose lives had been irrevocably altered by a single act of selfless kindness. Weeks passed, and the changes within Ashwood territory became impossible to ignore, even for the most skeptical villagers. Grain shipments arrived regularly at the lower village markets, their prices fair and accessible to those who had long struggled to afford even basic necessities. New wells were dug closer to the poorest neighborhoods, reducing the long, exhausting walks families once faced, simply to gather clean water. Alira noticed the changes gradually, watching as the elderly beta man who had been beaten in the street now received regular assistance from newly appointed pack officials, ensuring his small farm received fair support rather than exploitative tribute demands. Children who once wandered the streets with hollow, hungry expressions now had access to a newly established food program providing daily meals. Despite witnessing these improvements firsthand, Illyra remained distant, wrapped in her own conflicted emotions regarding the king who had orchestrated such sweeping reforms. She busied herself with her small garden, tending the herbs she had cultivated over years of careful, patient effort, using them to prepare remedies she quietly sold or traded within the village. One afternoon, as she knelt in her garden pulling weeds from around her herbs, she heard familiar footsteps approaching along the narrow path leading to her cottage. She looked up, expecting perhaps a neighbor or a customer seeking remedies, but instead found herself staring directly at Alaric Voss, dressed simply this time, without the elaborate royal attire she had witnessed briefly during his guard's arrival weeks earlier. "Illyra," he said quietly, stopping a respectful distance away. She rose slowly, brushing dirt from her hands, her expression carefully guarded. "My king," she said formally, though the title felt strange and distant on her tongue, given the intimacy they had once shared. "Please," he said, something like pain flickering across his features. "Do not address me so formally, not after everything." "What would you have me call you then?" she asked, unable to fully mask the edge in her voice. "Rurik? A name that was never truly yours to begin with." He winced slightly at her words but did not look away. "You have every right to your anger, Illyra. I deceived you, even if my intentions were never to cause you harm. Why have you come here?" she asked, crossing her arms protectively over her chest. Surely a king has more pressing matters than visiting the cottage of a poor Omega he once used to gather information about his own kingdom. "I did not use you," he said firmly, though his voice remained gentle. "Whatever began as a test of my pack's true character became something far more meaningful during my time here. You showed me kindness I had never experienced before, not from advisors, not from council members, not from anyone within my own palace walls." Illyra remained silent, though she could not deny the sincerity evident in his tone and expression. She glanced briefly toward the village beyond her small garden, noting the visible improvements that had taken root since his return to power. "The reforms," she said finally, changing the subject slightly. "They have genuinely helped many people here." "That is only the beginning," Alaric said, relief evident in his voice at her willingness to speak with him further. "I intend to continue addressing every injustice I witnessed during my time here, ensuring no one within this territory suffers the same neglect you and countless others have endured for far too long." "And what of Cade?" she asked, unable to keep a hint of lingering fear from her voice. "Has he faced consequences for his actions?" "He has been stripped of his rank, and now serves within the lower villages, working to repair the harm his cruelty has caused," Alaric replied. "He will not trouble you or anyone else again, without facing severe consequences." Illyra nodded slowly, some of the tension easing slightly from her shoulders, though her guarded expression remained largely unchanged. "I am glad to hear these changes are genuine, that they will continue beyond a single visit meant to ease your conscience." "This is not about easing my conscience," Alaric said, taking a small step closer, though he remained careful not to invade her space too closely. "I came here today because I wanted you to know that everything I witnessed, everything I learned, it began with you. Your kindness, given freely without expectation of reward, showed me the true character of my people, far more clearly than any report or council meeting ever could." "I did not help you expecting recognition," Illyra said quietly. "I helped you because I could not bear to watch someone suffer needlessly, regardless of who they might be." "I know that," Alaric said, his gray eyes warm despite the lingering tension between them. "And that is precisely why your kindness meant so much. It was never given with any expectation of gain, simply because it was the right thing to do." Illyra looked away, unable to fully meet his intense gaze, conflicting emotions still churning within her chest, despite the genuine relief she felt at witnessing the positive changes within her village. "I appreciate you sharing this with me," she said finally, her voice softer than before. "And I am glad the reforms are helping so many people. But I do not know if I can simply forget the deception, regardless of your intentions." "I do not expect you to forget," Alaric said gently. "I only hope, in time, you might come to understand why such deception felt necessary, and perhaps forgive the pain it caused you personally." Illyra remained silent for a long moment, studying the man before her, no longer the ragged, starving stranger she had first encountered, yet still carrying the same quiet earnestness she had grown to trust during their days together. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to process everything that has happened, to see whether these changes truly last beyond the initial excitement of reform." "That is fair," Alaric said, nodding respectfully. "I will not pressure you further, but please know, Alira, my gratitude toward you remains genuine, regardless of how much time you may need." He turned to leave, taking a few steps back down the narrow path, before pausing and glancing back toward her. "For what it is worth," he added quietly, "the days I spent here, with you, they were among the most meaningful of my entire life, crown or no crown." With that, he departed, leaving Alira standing alone in her small garden, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions she could not yet fully untangle. She watched his retreating figure until he disappeared from sight, the quiet ache of longing mixing uncomfortably with the lingering hurt of his deception. As the days passed, Alira found herself watching the ongoing reforms with growing interest, despite her attempts to maintain emotional distance from the king responsible for such changes. She spoke with neighbors who expressed genuine gratitude for the improvements within their daily lives, watched children play freely, without the constant shadow of hunger weighing upon them, and slowly, despite her best efforts, felt the walls around her heart beginning to soften. Yet doubt remained, a persistent whisper reminding her of the pain she had felt upon learning the truth of Rurik's identity, and the fear that such deception, however well-intentioned, might resurface in other forms should she allow herself to trust him fully once more. Unbeknownst to her, similar doubts and fears plagued Alaric as he continued his work within the palace, wondering whether the woman whose selfless kindness had changed the course of his entire kingdom might ever find it within herself to forgive him fully, or whether the wound of his deception had cut too deeply to ever truly heal. Neither could yet predict how the coming weeks would test their fragile, developing connection, nor the challenges still awaiting them both, as old enemies within the palace began to resist the sweeping changes threatening their long-held positions of privilege and power. Within the palace, resistance to Alaric's reforms grew steadily among certain council members who had long benefited from the corrupt systems now being dismantled. Chief among them was a wealthy merchant named Colton, whose family had profited enormously from overpricing grain sold to the lower villages for generations. Colton met privately with several like-minded council members in a dimly lit chamber away from the main hall, their expressions tense with barely concealed frustration. "These reforms threaten everything our families have built," Colton said, his voice low but urgent. "If grain prices remain fair, if the poorest villages receive proper support, our profits will collapse within months." "The king seems determined to see these changes through," another merchant added grimly. "He has already removed 3 overseers from their positions this week alone, replacing them with officials loyal only to his new vision. Then perhaps," Colton said carefully, "we need to remind our king exactly how fragile such reforms can be, especially if certain complications arise to distract him from his current focus." The others exchanged uneasy glances, understanding the implication behind his words, though none dared question directly what such complications might involve. Meanwhile, within the lower village, life continued to improve steadily for its residents, including Alira, who found herself slowly, cautiously, allowing herself to hope that the changes taking root might indeed prove lasting. She had begun selling her herbal remedies more openly, no longer forced to accept unfair prices from merchants seeking to exploit her desperation. One afternoon, as she prepared a batch of healing salve for a customer, she noticed unfamiliar faces lingering near the edge of the village, their expressions calculating as they watched the daily activities with obvious interest. She thought little of it initially, assuming them simply travelers passing through, until she overheard fragments of conversation carried on the wind. Easy enough to arrange, especially given her connection to the king. Alira's blood ran cold as she caught the words, quickly ducking behind a nearby stall to listen further without being noticed. "The king has grown too attached to sentimentality since his time posing as a beggar," one of the strangers continued quietly. "If something were to happen to the Omega he seems so fond of, perhaps he would refocus his attention where it truly belongs, away from these reckless reforms." Fear gripped Alira's chest as she realized the danger she now faced, simply due to her association with the king, however complicated that association had become. She hurried back to her cottage, her mind racing with the implications of what she had just overheard. That evening, as darkness settled over the village, Alira remained cautious, checking her doors and windows multiple times, unable to shake the lingering unease from the conversation she had witnessed. Despite her efforts to remain calm, sleep proved elusive, her thoughts consumed by worry over what such threats might mean for her safety. The following morning, she made a difficult decision. Despite her lingering hurt and unresolved feelings toward Alaric, she could not ignore the potential danger threatening not only herself, but possibly others within the village, who might be caught in the crossfire of whatever scheme was being plotted against the king's reforms. She traveled to the palace, her heart pounding with nervous uncertainty as she approached the grand gates, guards eyeing her curiously before recognizing her from the earlier incident involving the king's disguise. "I need to speak with the Alpha King," she said firmly, despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "It concerns a matter of urgent safety." Word was sent ahead, and within moments, Alira found herself escorted into the palace, its grandeur both impressive and overwhelming, compared to the simple cottage she called home. Alaric met her in a smaller receiving room, his expression shifting quickly from surprise to concern, as he noted the tension evident in her posture. "Alira, what has happened?" he asked, immediately moving toward her. "I overheard something troubling," she said quickly, recounting the conversation she had witnessed near the village outskirts, watching as his expression darkened progressively with each detail she shared. "Colton," he muttered under his breath once she finished. "I suspected he might resist the reforms, but I did not anticipate he would resort to threats against innocent lives to protect his corrupt profits." "What will you do?" Alira asked, still visibly shaken by the implications of the threat she had overheard. "I will ensure your safety immediately," Alaric said firmly, "and I will investigate this matter thoroughly. Such threats cannot go unanswered, regardless of the position or wealth of those responsible." He called for his personal guard captain, a stern but fair alpha named Tobias, instructing him to arrange protective measures for Alira immediately, including regular patrols near her cottage and a discreet guard presence to ensure her continued safety. "Thank you," Alira said quietly once the arrangements had been made, some of the tension easing from her shoulders, despite the lingering fear from the morning's revelations. "You did not have to come here," Alaric said gently. "Despite everything between us, you still chose to warn me of this danger. I could not simply ignore a threat that might endanger others, regardless of my personal feelings," Alira replied honestly. "Whatever exists between us, it does not change who I am at my core." Alaric studied her for a long moment, something warm and grateful flickering behind his gray eyes. "Your character continues to humble me, Alira. Even now, despite the pain I have caused you, you chose to act selflessly, to protect not only yourself, but potentially countless others who might be affected by such schemes." She offered a small, tired smile, the first genuine warmth she had shown him since learning the truth of his identity. Perhaps some habits are simply too deeply ingrained to abandon, regardless of circumstance. Over the following days, Alaric's investigation into Colton's activities revealed a deeper web of corruption than initially suspected, involving multiple merchants and even a few remaining council members who had continued secretly undermining the reforms through hoarding resources and manipulating prices behind the scenes. Alira, meanwhile, found herself returning to the palace more frequently, initially citing safety concerns, though gradually their conversations extended beyond mere practical matters into something warmer, more reminiscent of the connection they had shared during those early days in her cottage. Slowly, cautiously, the walls Alira had constructed around her heart began to soften further, though lingering doubt remained, a quiet reminder of the pain his deception had once caused her. Yet watching him work tirelessly to address the corruption threatening his kingdom, watching the genuine care he continued to show toward her safety and well-being, she found herself increasingly unable to deny the deepening connection, still growing steadily between them, despite everything that had transpired. As the investigation into Colton's schemes drew closer to a decisive confrontation, neither Alira nor Alaric could yet predict how dangerously close the threat against her safety truly remained, nor the lengths certain desperate individuals might go to protect their crumbling positions of power and privilege within the increasingly reformed kingdom of Ashwood. The investigation into Colton's activities moved swiftly under Alaric's direct oversight, Guard Captain Tobias, leading a discreet team, tasked with gathering evidence of the merchant's continued corruption. Within days, they uncovered hidden ledgers, documenting years of inflated pricing, secret grain hoarding, and bribes paid to overseers willing to look the other way, while the poorest villages suffered under artificially created scarcity. Despite the mounting evidence, Colton remained dangerously desperate, aware that exposure would mean not only the loss of his wealth, but severe punishment for his crimes against the pack. Cornered and increasingly reckless, he began plotting more drastic measures to protect himself, measures that would soon place Alira directly in harm's way. One evening, as Alira walked the familiar path back toward her cottage, after delivering herbal remedies to a neighboring family, she noticed unfamiliar figures trailing at a distance, their movements deliberately casual, yet unmistakably purposeful. Her heart quickened as she recalled the earlier threat she had overheard, and she quickened her pace, though the figures matched her speed effortlessly. Just as she reached the edge of the village, one of the figures called out sharply, "Alira, wait a moment." She turned reluctantly, recognizing the man as one of Colton's known associates, a beta merchant named Whitfield who had frequently overseen unfair pricing within the village markets. "What do you want?" she asked warily, keeping careful distance between them. "Merely a friendly conversation," Whitfield said, though his smile carried no genuine warmth. "It has come to our attention that you have grown rather close to the king lately, perhaps close enough to influence certain decisions regarding ongoing investigations." "I have no influence over the king's decisions," Alira replied firmly, though unease coiled tightly in her stomach. "Whatever investigation is occurring, it exists because of genuine wrongdoing, not personal influence." "Perhaps," Whitfield said, his tone turning colder, "but it would be wise to remember that certain complications can arise for those who involve themselves too deeply in matters beyond their station." Before Alira could respond, another figure emerged from the shadows behind Whitfield, larger and more menacing, clearly meant to reinforce the implied threat. Fear gripped her chest tightly, though she forced herself to remain outwardly composed, despite the danger evident in their intentions. "I suggest you convince the king to abandon this pointless investigation," Whitfield continued, "before matters escalate beyond simple conversation." "I will not be threatened into influencing decisions that protect innocent people from corruption," Alira said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Whitfield's expression darkened further, and he took a threatening step closer. "Then perhaps you require a more direct demonstration of the consequences awaiting those who resist." Just as the larger figure moved to grab her arm, a sharp voice rang out from further down the path. "Step away from her immediately." Alira turned to see Guard Captain Tobias approaching swiftly, several armed guards flanking him, their expressions grim and determined. The men accompanying Whitfield froze, clearly unprepared for the sudden intervention. "This does not concern palace guards," Whitfield said quickly, though panic flickered beneath his forced calm. "Threatening a citizen under the king's direct protection concerns me greatly," Tobias replied coldly, drawing his sword partially from its sheath as a clear warning. "Stand down immediately, or face consequences far more severe than simple detainment." Whitfield and his companion exchanged nervous glances before slowly backing away, clearly recognizing the futility of resistance against armed palace guards. "This is not finished," Whitfield muttered, before turning and disappearing quickly into the shadows with his companion. Tobias immediately turned his attention to Alira, his expression softening with concern. "Are you unharmed?" "Yes," Alira said, though her voice trembled slightly from the lingering adrenaline of the confrontation. "Thank you for arriving when you did." "The king assigned regular patrols specifically for your protection," Tobias explained. "It seems his caution was well justified given tonight's events." Alira nodded, though her mind raced with the implications of the direct threat she had just faced. Whatever Colton and his associates were willing to risk, it was clear they viewed the ongoing investigation as an existential threat, worth resorting to intimidation and violence to prevent. Tobias insisted on personally escorting her back to the palace that evening, unwilling to risk further danger given the clear escalation demonstrated by Whitfield's threats. Alaric met them upon arrival, his expression shifting rapidly from concern to barely restrained fury as Tobias recounted the details of the confrontation. "This ends now," Alaric said firmly. His gray eyes hardened with determination. Colton's desperation has clearly pushed him toward reckless endangerment of innocent lives. I will not allow such threats to continue unanswered. He immediately ordered Colton's arrest, along with Whitfield and several other associates implicated in the corruption and subsequent threats against Alira's safety. Within hours, palace guards moved swiftly through the village, apprehending each individual involved in the escalating scheme before further harm could occur. Alira remained within the palace that night, too shaken by the evening's events to return safely to her cottage, despite the arrests. Alaric personally ensured she had access to comfortable quarters, food, and anything else she might need, his concern for her well-being evident in every careful arrangement made on her behalf. Later that evening, as Alira sat quietly within the palace gardens, attempting to process the frightening events of the day, Alaric found her, settling carefully beside her, without invading her space too closely. I am deeply sorry you were placed in danger, because of your association with me, he said softly. This should never have happened. You could not have predicted Colton's desperation would escalate so quickly, Alira replied, though her voice still carried traces of lingering fear. The fault lies with him, not with you. Regardless, Alaric said, I intend to ensure such threats never endanger you again. Colton and his associates will face severe consequences for their actions, and I will personally ensure your continued protection moving forward. Alira studied him carefully in the soft evening light, noting the genuine worry evident in his expression, worry that extended far beyond simple political concern over the corruption scandal now unfolding. Thank you, she said quietly, for taking this so seriously, for protecting me despite everything that has happened between us. I would protect you regardless of anything that has happened between us, Alaric said, his voice carrying quiet sincerity. Your safety matters to me deeply, Alira, far beyond any political considerations. Something shifted between them in that quiet moment, the lingering walls of hurt and distrust, slowly beginning to crumble beneath the weight of genuine care and shared vulnerability. Alira found herself unable to deny the warmth steadily growing within her chest, despite her earlier resolve to maintain careful emotional distance from the king who had once deceived her so thoroughly. As the investigation into Colton's crimes continued in the following days, ultimately resulting in severe punishment for those involved in the corruption and subsequent threats, Alira and Alaric found their bond deepening steadily, forged through shared danger and mutual care that neither could easily dismiss any longer. Yet even as this immediate threat resolved successfully, deeper questions remained regarding the future of their relationship, questions neither had yet found the courage to fully address, questions that would soon require honest confrontation as the kingdom of Ashwood continued its journey toward lasting reform and genuine equality for all its people. In the weeks that followed the arrests of Colton and his associates, the kingdom of Ashwood settled into a new rhythm of transparency and fairness that many villagers had never before experienced. Trials were conducted openly, with evidence of corruption presented clearly before the pack, ensuring that justice appeared visible and legitimate rather than hidden behind closed palace doors. Colton himself, once among the wealthiest merchants within the territory, faced complete forfeiture of his ill-gotten wealth, the recovered resources redistributed directly to the villages he had exploited for years. Whitfield and the other associates involved in threatening Alira received similarly severe consequences, banished from Ashwood territory entirely, forbidden from ever returning under threat of harsher punishment. With the immediate danger resolved, life within the village gradually returned to a calmer rhythm, though the positive changes brought by Alaric's reforms continued steadily. Alira resumed her quiet routine, tending her garden and preparing herbal remedies, though she now did so with a lighter heart, free from the constant fear and uncertainty that had shadowed her daily existence for so long. Her relationship with Alaric, however, continued evolving in ways neither had fully anticipated. He visited regularly, no longer disguised as a humble beggar, but openly as himself, dressed simply out of respect for her comfort, rather than flaunting his status unnecessarily. Their conversations grew longer, deeper, touching upon topics ranging from his ongoing reforms to her quiet dreams for the future, dreams that no longer felt entirely impossible, given the changing circumstances surrounding her. One particularly warm afternoon, as they sat together within her small garden, surrounded by the herbs she had so carefully cultivated over years of quiet dedication, Alaric turned to her, with an expression more vulnerable than she had ever witnessed from him. "Alira," he began carefully, "I have wanted to speak with you about something for quite some time now, though I have hesitated, uncertain how you might receive such words given everything that has passed between us." She set aside the small basket of herbs she had been sorting, giving him her full attention, curiosity and gentle warmth evident in her expression. "You may speak freely, Alaric. Whatever concerns you, I am willing to listen." He took a steadying breath before continuing. "These past months, despite the difficult circumstances that first brought us together, despite the pain my deception caused you, I find myself unable to deny the depth of feeling that has grown within me toward you. You showed me kindness when I had nothing to offer in return, kindness that fundamentally changed not only my understanding of my own kingdom, but my understanding of what genuine connection and character truly mean." Alira's heart quickened, though she remained quiet, allowing him to continue expressing thoughts he had clearly held carefully guarded for some time. "I know I do not deserve easy forgiveness for the deception that began our connection," he continued, "nor do I expect you to simply set aside the pain such deception caused. But I could not continue without being honest about the depth of my feelings toward you, feelings that have only grown stronger through everything we have faced together since that difficult beginning." Alira remained silent for a long moment, processing the sincerity evident in his words, weighing them against the journey they had traveled together since that fateful morning, when she had first knelt beside a dying stranger near the village well. "Alaric," she said finally, her voice soft but steady, "when I first learned the truth of your identity, I felt betrayed beyond words. I felt as though the connection we had built, the trust I had extended so carefully despite years of learning not to trust easily, had been built upon a foundation of deception I could never fully forgive." He nodded, accepting her words without interruption, understanding the necessity of allowing her to fully express the hurt she had carried. "But," she continued, "watching you these past months, witnessing the genuine transformation within our kingdom, the fairness and protection now extended to those who were once forgotten and neglected, I have come to understand that whatever began as deception ultimately led toward something far more meaningful than either of us could have anticipated." She reached out, gently taking his hand within her own, a small gesture that carried immense weight given the journey they had traveled together. "I cannot say the hurt has fully disappeared, Alaric, but I can say that my feelings toward you have grown as well, despite my initial resistance to acknowledging them." Relief and quiet joy washed over his features as he carefully studied her expression, searching for any hesitation or doubt that might suggest her words were spoken merely out of politeness rather than genuine feeling. "I do not wish to rush anything between us," he said gently. "I simply wanted you to know the truth of my feelings, regardless of what path we choose to take moving forward." "I appreciate your patience," Alira said, a genuine smile finally breaking through her earlier caution. "Perhaps, given time, we might continue building something real between us, something founded not on deception, but on genuine honesty and mutual respect." "I would like nothing more," Alaric said softly, his gray eyes warm with quiet hope. Over the following weeks, their bond continued deepening naturally, free from the shadows of deception or danger that had once complicated their connection. Alaric continued his important work reforming the kingdom, ensuring fairness and protection extended to every corner of Ashwood territory, while Alira found herself increasingly welcomed not only by Alaric himself, but gradually by the wider village community, who had witnessed firsthand the genuine positive changes brought about through her unlikely connection to their king. The elderly beta man once threatened by Cade's cruelty now greeted her warmly whenever their paths crossed, grateful for the fair treatment his farm now received under the reformed pack policies. Children who once suffered from hunger now played freely throughout the village, their laughter carrying a lightness that had been notably absent during the years of neglect and corruption. Even Cade, still serving his punishment within the lower villages, approached Alira one afternoon with genuine humility, offering a sincere apology for his previous cruelty and threats against her safety. Though she remained cautious given their difficult history, she found herself willing to accept his apology, recognizing the genuine effort he had made toward change during his months of service among those he once exploited. As the seasons shifted and the kingdom of Ashwood continued its steady journey toward lasting reform and equality, Elira found herself reflecting often upon the strange, unexpected path that had led her from the poorest, most forgotten corner of her territory into a genuine, meaningful connection with the very king whose kingdom had once caused her such profound suffering. She understood now that true character was revealed not through wealth, status, or bloodline, but through simple, genuine kindness, offered freely, even when circumstances seemed most desperate or uncertain. Her willingness to share her last piece of bread with a dying stranger had ultimately transformed not only her own life, but the lives of countless others throughout the kingdom of Ashwood. Yet even as their bond continued deepening steadily, both Elira and Alaric understood that greater challenges still remained ahead, challenges that would soon test not only their personal connection, but the very foundation of the reforms they had worked so tirelessly to establish throughout the kingdom. Despite the widespread success of Alaric's reforms, whispers of discontent lingered among a small faction of traditionalist pack elders who viewed the sweeping changes as a dangerous departure from long-held customs regarding bloodline hierarchy and status. Chief among these elders was a stern, aging alpha named Whitmore, who had served the pack council for decades and viewed the elevation of lower-ranked citizens with deep suspicion. Whitmore called a private meeting among several like-minded elders, gathering within a secluded chamber, away from the main palace halls where Alaric's growing influence held less sway over their traditional views. The king's reforms threaten the very structure that has maintained order within our pack for generations, Whitmore stated firmly, addressing the small gathering with obvious concern. Bloodline hierarchy exists for good reason. It ensures those most capable of leadership and decision-making retain proper authority within our society. Yet the reforms have brought genuine improvement to countless lives, another elder countered cautiously, though clearly hesitant to fully oppose Whitmore's viewpoint. Perhaps some flexibility within tradition need not threaten the fundamental order you fear losing. Flexibility leads to chaos, Whitmore insisted sharply, and now, rumors suggest the king himself has grown attached to an omega of notably weak bloodline, the very woman his reforms seem designed to elevate beyond her proper station. Such personal involvement threatens the integrity of leadership itself. The gathered elders exchanged uneasy glances, aware of the growing connection between Alaric and Elira that had become increasingly evident throughout recent months, though few had dared openly discuss the matter given the king's clear determination to pursue such reforms regardless of traditional objections. "What do you propose?" one elder asked cautiously. "We must present our concerns directly to the king," Whitmore said firmly. "Remind him of his responsibilities toward maintaining proper order and hierarchy, regardless of personal feelings that may have developed toward this omega." Word of the elder's concerns eventually reached Alaric through careful, discreet channels, prompting him to arrange a formal meeting to address their objections directly, rather than allowing such tension to fester unnoticed beneath the surface of his ongoing reforms. The meeting occurred within the Grand Hall, Whitmore and several supporting elders standing before Alaric with expressions carefully composed despite the obvious tension underlying their presence. "My king," Whitmore began formally, "we come before you with concerns regarding the direction of recent reforms. Concerns rooted in genuine care for the stability and traditional order of our pack." "Speak freely, Whitmore," Alaric replied evenly, though his gray eyes carried a steady, watchful intensity. "I value honest discussion, even when it challenges decisions I have already made. The reforms themselves have brought undeniable improvement to many lives throughout our territory," Whitmore acknowledged carefully. "However, we grow concerned regarding rumors of your personal involvement with an omega of notably weak bloodline. Such connection, should it continue developing, risks undermining the very hierarchy that has maintained proper order within our pack for generations." Alaric's expression remained calm, though a quiet, steady resolve settled firmly across his features. "You speak of Elira," he said directly, refusing to allow vague implications to obscure the true subject of their concern. "Yes, my king," Whitmore confirmed, though he shifted slightly under the weight of Alaric's steady gaze. "We simply wish to remind you of the importance of maintaining proper distinction between leadership and those of lesser status, regardless of personal feelings that may have developed." "Let me be clear," Alaric said, his voice carrying quiet but unmistakable authority throughout the hall. "The very system of hierarchy you describe, one that determines a person's worth based solely upon bloodline rather than character, integrity, or genuine contribution to our pack, is precisely the flawed system I have worked tirelessly to reform these past several months. Whitmore's expression tightened, though he remained respectfully silent, allowing the king to continue. Elira, Alaric continued, despite being labeled as possessing weak bloodline by traditional standards, demonstrated more genuine kindness, integrity, and selflessness than any member of this council, or the wider nobility, I have encountered throughout my entire reign. She shared her last piece of food with a starving stranger, expecting nothing in return. She warned me of danger despite her own justified anger toward my deception. She has consistently proven her character through action, rather than relying upon the accident of privileged birth. He paused, allowing his words to settle heavily over the gathered elders, before continuing firmly. If such genuine character does not qualify someone for respect and consideration within our pack, regardless of bloodline, then perhaps the traditional hierarchy you seek to protect is fundamentally flawed and unworthy of continued preservation. Whitmore remained silent for a long moment, clearly struggling to formulate a response against the king's direct and passionate defense. "My king," he said finally, his voice more subdued than before, "we simply wish to ensure stability and proper order continue within our pack." "Stability built upon injustice and false hierarchy is no true stability at all," Alaric replied firmly. "True stability comes from fairness, from ensuring every member of our pack, regardless of bloodline or status, receives equal opportunity to demonstrate their worth through genuine character and contribution." The gathered elders exchanged uneasy glances, clearly recognizing the futility of further opposing the king's firm resolve regarding both his reforms and his personal connection with Elira. Slowly, one by one, they offered respectful acknowledgement, understanding that continued resistance would likely prove fruitless given Alaric's unwavering determination. "We understand your position, my king," Whitmore said finally, bowing respectfully, despite his obvious reservations. "We will not continue to oppose your reforms, though we hope you will consider carefully the challenges such changes may continue to present moving forward." "I appreciate your honesty, Whitmore," Alaric replied, his tone softening slightly, now that the tension had eased. "I do not dismiss the importance of stability within our pack. I simply believe true stability must be built upon fairness and genuine merit, rather than outdated hierarchy that serves only to perpetuate injustice." As the elders departed, Alaric remained within the grand hall, reflecting upon the confrontation and its implications for the continued success of his reforms. He understood that resistance from traditionalist factions would likely continue in various forms, yet he remained firmly resolved to see his vision of a fairer, more equitable kingdom through to completion, regardless of the challenges still ahead. Word of the confrontation eventually reached Elira through careful, discreet channels, and though she felt a renewed flicker of anxiety regarding the traditionalist opposition to their growing connection, she also felt a deep, warm gratitude toward Alaric's unwavering defense of her character and worth, regardless of the bloodline that had long been used to diminish her value within pack society. That evening, as Alaric visited her cottage once more, she greeted him with a warmth and openness that reflected the genuine trust steadily rebuilding between them, despite the challenges still surrounding their unlikely connection. "I heard of your meeting with the elders," she said quietly, as they settled together within her small garden, the evening air carrying the sweet scent of herbs she had so carefully cultivated over years of patient dedication. "Word travels quickly, it seems," Alaric replied with a small, tired smile. "Thank you," Elira said sincerely, "for defending my worth so firmly, despite the traditional views held by those elders." "I spoke only the truth," Alaric said gently. "Your character has proven itself repeatedly, regardless of what traditional hierarchy might suggest about your worth, based solely upon bloodline." Elira reached for his hand, a small but meaningful gesture, reflecting the deepening trust and affection steadily growing between them, despite the challenges still surrounding their connection. "Whatever challenges remain ahead," she said softly, "I am grateful to face them alongside you." "As am I," Alaric replied, his gray eyes warm with quiet affection and steady resolve. As their bond continued deepening steadily despite lingering traditionalist opposition, both Elira and Alaric understood that the true test of their connection, and of the reforms he had worked so tirelessly to establish, still awaited them in the days ahead. A final challenge that would ultimately determine whether genuine change could truly take permanent root within the kingdom of Ashwood. Months passed, and the kingdom of Ashwood continued its steady transformation into a territory defined by fairness and genuine opportunity for all its citizens, regardless of bloodline or status. The lower villages, once forgotten and neglected, now thrived with proper resources, fair treatment, and renewed hope for a brighter future. Children grew strong and healthy, elders received proper care and respect, and the corruption that had once plagued the pack's distribution systems remained firmly dismantled through Alaric's continued vigilance and commitment to genuine reform. Elira's small herbal shop, once merely a quiet corner of her modest cottage, had grown into a respected establishment within the village, her remedies sought after not only by fellow villagers, but increasingly by those from neighboring territories, who had heard of her exceptional skill and knowledge. Her success stood as a quiet testament to the opportunities now available to those who had once been dismissed simply due to circumstances of birth. Throughout these months, her connection with Alaric had continued deepening steadily, built upon genuine honesty, mutual respect, and shared commitment toward ensuring lasting positive change throughout the kingdom. The traditionalist opposition that had once threatened their bond gradually softened as well, many elders coming to recognize the undeniable positive impact of the reforms, alongside Elira's genuine character and contribution toward the well-being of the wider pack community. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves drifted gently across the palace gardens, Alaric requested Elira's presence for what he described only as an important occasion, though he refused to reveal further details, despite her curious questioning. She arrived at the palace gardens dressed simply yet elegantly in a soft blue gown, a gift from Alaric that she had initially hesitated to accept, before finally relenting given his gentle insistence. The gardens themselves had been transformed for the occasion, adorned with simple, yet beautiful arrangements of native flowers, and soft, flowing fabric that caught the gentle autumn breeze. Alaric awaited her near the center of the garden, dressed simply as well, without the elaborate royal attire she had grown accustomed to seeing him wear during official occasions. His expression carried a mixture of nervous anticipation and quiet joy as she approached. "Alaric," she said softly, glancing around at the carefully arranged garden, "what is this occasion you have prepared?" He took her hands gently within his own, his gray eyes warm and steady as he looked upon her. "Elira, from the moment you shared your last piece of bread with a starving stranger, you changed not only my understanding of leadership and character, but my entire heart as well. Through every challenge we have faced together since that difficult beginning, deception, danger, opposition, your kindness, strength, and unwavering integrity have remained constant." Elira's heart quickened, understanding gradually dawning as she recognized the significance of the moment unfolding before her. "I do not wish to rule this kingdom alone any longer," Alaric continued, his voice carrying quiet, genuine emotion. "I wish to build a future alongside someone whose character truly reflects the values I hope to instill throughout our entire pack, values of kindness, fairness, and genuine care for others, regardless of circumstance or status." He knelt gently before her, still holding her hands within his own. "Elira, will you do me the honor of becoming my queen, ruling alongside me, as we continue building a kingdom defined by fairness and genuine opportunity for every citizen, regardless of the bloodline or circumstance into which they were born?" Tears gathered at the corners of Elira's eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of emotion and sincerity evident in his proposal. She thought of the journey that had brought her to this moment, from the poorest, most forgotten corner of the kingdom, sharing her last piece of bread with a dying stranger, to standing now within the palace gardens, being offered a future she could never have imagined possible. "Yes," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yes, Alaric, I will." Joy spread across his features as he rose to embrace her fully, the weight of months filled with challenge, danger, and gradual healing finally giving way to genuine, unrestrained happiness. Around them, palace staff and a few close advisors who had gathered discreetly to witness the moment offered quiet, genuine applause, having come to respect Elira deeply through her unwavering integrity throughout the tumultuous months of reform. Their wedding, held several weeks later, brought together villagers from every corner of Ashwood territory, regardless of status or bloodline, a clear symbol of the genuine unity now taking root throughout the kingdom. The elderly beta man, once threatened by Cade's cruelty, attended with genuine joy, alongside children who had once suffered from hunger, but now thrived under the kingdom's renewed commitment to fairness and care for all citizens. Even Cade, having completed his period of service and genuinely transformed through his experience working alongside those he once exploited, attended respectfully, offering sincere well wishes to both Elira and Alaric as they began their new life together. As Elira stood beside Alaric during the ceremony, dressed in a gown far removed from the ragged clothing she had once worn, while surviving alone within her small, forgotten cottage, she reflected upon the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She thought of the stranger she had found, dying near the village well, never imagining that simple act of kindness would ultimately transform not only her own life, but the entire kingdom of Ashwood. Following their wedding, Elira embraced her new role as queen, with the same genuine dedication and care that had defined her character throughout her difficult years of poverty and neglect. Her first official act involved establishing a permanent program ensuring no citizen throughout Ashwood territory would ever again suffer the same hunger and neglect she had once endured. A program that provided consistent access to food, healthcare, and basic necessities regardless of bloodline or status. She also worked closely with Alaric to establish educational opportunities for children throughout the lower villages, ensuring future generations would never face the same barriers to opportunity that had once defined her own difficult childhood following the loss of her parents. Years later, the kingdom of Ashwood stood as a shining example of fairness and genuine opportunity, its transformation sparked entirely by a single act of selfless kindness, an Omega sharing her last piece of bread with a stranger she believed to be nothing more than a dying beggar. Elira often reflected upon that pivotal morning, recognizing that true character reveals itself not through wealth, status, or the circumstances of birth, but through simple, genuine kindness offered freely, even when one has seemingly nothing left to give. Her willingness to share what little she possessed had ultimately transformed not only her own life, elevating her from the poorest, most forgotten corner of her kingdom to its very throne, but had reshaped the entire foundation of Ashwood territory into a place defined by genuine fairness, opportunity, and care for every citizen, regardless of bloodline or circumstance. And though the path towards such transformation had been filled with challenge, danger, and difficult moments of doubt and hurt, both Elira and Alaric understood that their journey together, born from an unexpected act of kindness between a starving king and the poorest Omega in his kingdom, had ultimately created something far more meaningful and lasting than either could have ever imagined during that first, fateful morning near the village well. Their story became legend throughout Ashwood territory, passed down through generations as a powerful reminder that true worth lies not in wealth or bloodline, but in the genuine kindness and integrity each person chooses to demonstrate toward others, regardless of circumstance, and that even the smallest act of selfless generosity possesses the power to change not only individual lives, but entire kingdoms, forever.